Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Geonetric's September webinar, where we're going to be talking about insights and trends from the 2020 Healthcare Digital Marketing Trends Survey. Before we get started, I did just want to go over a few housekeeping items with you. First, you can get signed up for next month's webinar right now at geonetric.com/webinars. We're going to be talking about planning and engaging intranet for the 2020s. And so Erin Schrader is going to be presenting, and she's going to talk about some of the latest trends in intranets, functionality, what you need to deliver a great user experience, especially with how important the intranet has become in this global pandemic, kind of what is going on around us now. Wanted to do one more plug for our 2020 Healthcare Digital Marketing Trends Survey ebook. It's very close to done. We're hoping to get it out and released next week. So to make sure that you get a copy of that ebook as soon as it's ready, go to geonetric.com/wait-for-it. See what I did there? Today's webinar is brought to you by Geonetric. We are a marketing agency and technology partner that helps healthcare organizations around the country generate marketing results. We offer a suite of services, including website design and development, marketing campaigns, SEO, content development, and more. You can learn more by visiting our website, geonetric.com. Today, we've got Geonetric's Chief Strategy Officer, Ben Dillon, in the presenter seat. Ben is a highly sought after speaker. He's the past president of SHSMD, eHealthcare Strategy and Trends, advisory board member, a lot of experience in the space, and had the pleasure of chatting with him a month or so ago in a video you may have seen, Dishing with Dylan, Season 1, Episode 1, where Ben kind of talks about how he's been into the data and analytics around this survey for all of the years that it's been around. And so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to this. I did just also want to mention before I turn the mic over to Ben that we're going to handle the Q&A a little bit differently this month because there's so much content for us to cover. We do still want you to submit your questions in the questions box within GoToWebinar. But we're going to try and answer those offline and then get them into a video format that we send out with the recording once that's done. So hopefully we can get the recording and all the questions answered for you and have that out to you by the end of this week. I think that is it for me, so I will turn the mic over to Ben.
Thank you, Cole. Always excited to do this webinar every year. It's probably my favorite. We dive into all of this data and then get to share all that thinking with you. This is the 10th edition of our survey. Internally, we call this an annual-ish survey. We actually did the first one 15 years ago. We've done 10 editions, however the math works out there. And certainly this is a huge undertaking every year. A huge thank you to our team here. I get to be the face man for all of this, and certainly I am deep into the data and analysis, but this is a huge team effort on the part of Geonetric. Thanks to all those folks. Thanks also to eHealthcare Strategy and Trends. We are partnering with them again this year. This is, I think, the 4th year that we've collaborated on this, and it's really been a great partnership in terms of getting this survey out into the world and actually getting the message out to collect that data as well. And a big thank you to this group of folks as well. This is our advisory board this year. We've done this a couple of times now, and we really stepped back a couple of years ago and said, it'd be great if we had a few more eyes and voices in on how we're shaping this, how we're focusing, help us think through some of the stickier bits of the questions. And again, this group of folks really stepped up this year. We asked a lot of them, and their fingerprints are throughout this. They really helped us think through a number of issues. And this year in particular, maybe the most valuable thing was they helped us work through when was the right time to actually open data collection for the survey. It's been, as Cole mentioned, it has been an unprecedented year, and it's hit healthcare, I think, particularly hard and in different ways than every other industry. And one of our big challenges was, when is it okay for us to start calling people and asking them to participate in something like this? That turns out to be a little bit important as we think about the results of this as well. We did most of the data collection in the June-July timeframe, and now we've been analyzing the data since then. So that will come up as we are going through and reviewing some things as well. We have done this for a long time now. There's a lot of things where we're asking similar kinds of questions year after year. There are always areas where we're going to deep dive in something new and shiny, or in this case, like we couldn't do a survey without asking some questions specifically about the biggest story of what has been going on within healthcare this year, and that has obviously been the pandemic crisis and everything related to that within healthcare marketing, within digital. And so there were certainly some areas where we did some deep dives to explore how the crisis has impacted some of the operations of the folks that we survey. In addition to that, obviously, there are lots of things where we'll get into looking and analyzing a particular question, saying, here we are definitely seeing some signs of what's going on in our industry right now. And so it goes through a lot of things. But we did poke on job satisfaction and retention, and how digital marketing, digital transformation initiatives were being impacted. We also did a bunch of work on intranets. And just because this has been such a communication intensive crisis, we've heard people thinking about and talking about the communication tools that they're using for that internal communication with staff and physicians and folks like that. We wanted to understand that a little bit more. However, partly because of time and partly for some other things, we are doing an intranet webinar next month that will, amongst other things, cover some of the data from the survey and intranets. So it will be in the survey ebook. It will be in next month's webinar. We're not going to touch on it really today. We also got into a number of other areas, marketing personalization and content marketing in particular. And again, those are great ebook items. We're not going to, well, we might hit some of that today, but we're not going to go real deep on those items today either. Let's start with a little bit just from that pandemic playbook. We were really curious about how staff were reacting to the pandemic. And to be totally honest, this was a set of questions we snuck in literally at the 11th hour. I think in the middle of the night before, I was doing some last checks before we launched survey data collection. I said, I have to put this in. We were hearing so much from other research looking primarily at frontline and clinical operations folks and how they were reacting to the pandemic, burnout questions, real concerns about people expressing this interest in maybe sticking it out through the pandemic, maybe leaving healthcare after that. So we wanted to ask some questions about stress, about how people were dealing with this, and about how they're feeling about their role within healthcare within this space. Because honestly, the folks that we're talking with here, hospital, health system marketers, digital marketers, they're feeling a lot of that stress as well, the long work hours, the crisis communications, the furloughs and pay cuts, and all the things that I think were stressing people in other parts of the organization, absolutely stressing folks in our space as well. And of course, these are skill sets that translate really, really well to lots of other industries where maybe the stress level wasn't quite as intense. So we asked about current work-related stress, and the answer is that yes, these folks were absolutely feeling more stressed than usual. So 46% higher than normal, 10% much higher than normal. Not as bad as it could be, honestly, maybe not quite as bad as I thought the results of this question might be, but certainly we're seeing elevated stress levels within this group. Fortunately, it does not look like that's going to translate into a mass exodus. Now, of course, these are people responding to the survey. By June-July timeframe, we had seen layoffs in some places. We'd seen some other things. It's unclear if people who have already been sort of temporarily or permanently let go, if they match this pattern as well. So we may have a little bit more brain drain than this, but we only saw 3% of people saying, hey, I'm looking to leave healthcare right now. Another 3% saying, hey, I'm going to stick it out through the pandemic, but then I'm going to leave. But on the other side of it, we saw 8% of respondents indicate, hey, I'm actually probably less likely to leave healthcare now than I was in the past. People seeing how the work that they're doing has an impact on people's lives and the importance of it through this pandemic actually has taken maybe a similar number of people, maybe a slightly larger number of people. It's right down that line of statistical significance. But saying, hey, I'm at least as attached as I was before. And of course, we had a large group that said, I'm no more or less likely to leave healthcare, and a good sized group, 40%, saying, look, healthcare is my industry. I am committed to this for the long haul. So the good news is that despite the accelerated stress, that in fact, we're not expecting lots of people to be leaving the industry as a result of this pandemic. All right, one of the things as we analyze this data that I think is pretty unique to our organization in this survey is we look not just at sort of the averages across all respondents, but we look specifically at how leading organizations do things different than everyone else. And that kind of overall picture of the industry, the average of everyone responding is interesting, but we found very early on in our survey that it wasn't always as actionable as we wanted it to be. So we really tried to break out how organizations that are falling behind are doing, how average organizations are doing, and how leaders are doing, what they're doing, and how they're doing things differently to help provide a blueprint for organizations at whatever stage they're at to look at maybe that next stage and say, what does it look like for me to get my organization there? What do we need to do differently? How do we need to staff differently? What are the priorities that we'll start to see as we continue to evolve as a digital marketing organization? And we are not making the judgments on this. We are not looking at the organizations and saying, oh, clear leader, clearly falling behind. This is all self-reported data. So we're taking your word for it. What we actually do here is we have 21 categories, and we'll look at the actual categories here in just a sec. We have 21 categories, and each respondent scored themselves in each of those categories from significantly behind, which was a -2 score, to significantly ahead, which is a +2 score. So -2 to +2, and for 21 questions. So we have potential scores from -42 to +42. In reality, our low score was -31. Our high score was a 36 or a 38, I guess. And we grade on a curve. We have this nice bell-shaped curve, which the data geeks out there always, it makes us feel better when we have a nice bell-shaped curve on these things. But anyone that was 0 or less was in that laggard group. Anyone that was 10 or more was in the leader group, and the 0 to 10 is the average group. And how do we pick those breakpoints? Well, we picked breakpoints that gave us 3 groups that were pretty equally sized, and that was the only thing that went into that particular split. These are the 21 different categories. These are the different functional areas, and this list repeats itself in a number of areas throughout the survey, including staffing and investment and a bunch of other items. Again, we asked organizations to rate themselves in each of these categories. So the scores here are averages between that -2 and +2 range. A lot of data here, so let's quickly just kind of give ourselves a little bit of a context here. The first 3 columns, laggard, average, leader, that is our 3 cohorts. No surprise that laggards score lower than average, average score lower than leaders. It'd be weird if they didn't, because again, this is the set of questions that we use to put organizations or respondents into each one of these groups. So that's what those first 3 are. The 4th column overall is the average across all respondents to the survey. And then that last column, the delta, is looking at the leader score minus the laggard score. And it's really trying to show us where are the areas where leaders do things most differently from everyone else. What's the greatest deviation points there? Because sometimes those differences tell us some really interesting things. All right, so with that context in mind, let's start off. The top couple of items here, organizations feel really, really good about their social media, right? They feel really good. In fact, for the laggards, I think it is the only category greater than 0 as an aggregate score. So feeling really good about that, feeling pretty good about video production and website management, accessibility, and digital advertising as well. So those are areas where organizations felt best. When we look at the bottom, we see where organizations feel like they are struggling the most. So intranets, CRM, marketing automation, and mobile apps. So that's our bookends here. Those are the things at the top and the bottom. When we look just at where leaders feel like they are doing best, there we go. We get a slightly different set of priorities. Certainly social media, again, like everyone else, they feel great about their social media. But when we look at that next set, web design, really strong, and content development, web development, and SEO, all areas where leaders feel like they're really excelling within this. When we look at the deltas, again, the areas where leaders feel best about how they're doing relative to everyone else, again, we get some different categories in here. At the top of that is content development. Again, content appears to be, over the last couple of surveys, one of the areas that the best performing organizations have really invested heavily in. They're doing a great job in. It is the tide that lifts all boats, right? When you do content well, everything else you're doing from a digital marketing perspective works better. In addition to that, digital strategy, SEO, content marketing, all areas that are at the top of that list. I also want to point you to a couple of areas right at the bottom, because marketing automation, mobile app development, these are areas where leaders still don't feel particularly good about how they're doing. Still at the bottom of their list in terms of how they're doing on some different things, but they are doing so much better than other groups that when we look at the delta, it's some of the areas where they've got the greatest differences in performance. So even though they still don't feel like these are areas where they're excelling or where they've really reached their potential, they are areas where leaders are far outperforming most other organizations. All right, one of the areas that we explore is website redesigns and content management system changes. And typically over the years, we've seen a range that sort of suggests, redesign cycle times of 3 years to 5 years, right? 3 years might be, a third of the group in the planning stages, a third of the group doing a redesign right now, a third of the group who's recently completed a redesign, right? A 5-year cycle might be 20, 20, 20, and then 40% that is not in the process of doing a redesign right now. It's never completely clean like that, but the numbers give us somewhat of a suggestion about how often organizations are doing redesigns. What we have this year, I think, is somewhat indicative, again, of what's happened during the crisis. 20% of organizations completed a redesign in the last 12 months. 30% are in the process of doing or planning a redesign right now. Only 14% are actually doing a redesign right now. Big projects like this, I think, in a lot of cases, kind of got placed on the shelf. Organizations put them on hold. They decided not to begin them if they were at a point in the process where they didn't have to get them going, because so much time and attention from everyone within this group, from senior leadership on down, or just the inability to commit resources given some of the uncertainty that was coming around because of the crisis, really put a lot of these initiatives on hold. So this year, right now, only 14% of respondents are in the process of redesign. And again, that's a low number. That would be like something like a 7-year cycle if that was something that played out across the entire thing. More than twice as many organizations indicate they are planning for redesign than actually doing a redesign right now. Pretty interesting result, a little bit different than things that we've seen in the past. When we look at who's doing those redesigns, this is pretty typical of what we've seen in the past. The reality is organizations that feel like they're doing great are much less likely to be in the process of redesign. Redesigns tend to be things that are done by organizations that feel like they need to get ahead. So the leaders, a fair number, have no plans to redesign, and actually average and leader, pretty good number that have actually done a redesign recently. That's what's gotten them to where they are right now. The group that's doing redesigns that have it in process, doing the planning, much larger, much more likely to be in the laggard and average group. Groups that want to get ahead, that want to advance what they're doing from a digital marketing perspective. Now, content management system changes, replatformings, happen quite a lot less often than web redesigns. And so, no surprise here, 75% haven't redesigned or haven't replatformed recently and have no plans to replatform in the near future. But even here, we're seeing some of those same indications, right? 7% have replatformed in the last 12 months. Only 3% are in the process of doing that right now. A whopping 15% are in the planning stages for replatforming. So again, very different pattern than what we'd see normally, where these numbers might be more consistent within those three groups. Very different kind of pattern at work here. So then we cross these things, right? We look at if you're planning to do a redesign or where you are at in that cycle, that's our columns. We look at replatformings, that's our rows. And, no surprise, for a website, it's really unusual for organizations to replatform if they're not also in the midst of a redesign. So we see very few organizations that are just taking exactly what they have, putting it on a new content management system. In the recently completed category, just as kind of a baseline here, about a quarter of organizations that redesigned did a platform change as part of that redesign. Now, if we look at the redesigns in process right now, 7% of organizations in process right now are in the planning stages for CMS. Another 7% have that change in process right now. So about 14% of current redesigns in process are actually changing content management systems. Again, doing the redesign with the content management system change, bigger project, more complexity, more dollars, more likely maybe to have been put on the shelf in the midst of the crisis and everything that's gone on here. In contrast, of the redesigns that are in the planning stages, we see a huge number that have a CMS change being contemplated. Half of the organizations that are doing a redesign or planning a redesign right now are in the planning stages for a CMS change as well. It doesn't mean they'll all end up selecting something different or will choose to do something different, but that's a lot of content management systems that are in play for the coming year. All right, let's look next at some topics of strategy. What are the goals? What's important? How well are we doing against those goals? What are the barriers? What are the things that keep us from reaching our potential with digital? And so we start off by asking an importance question. And we have kind of a combination here. We do importance, and then we follow that up with how well are we able to demonstrate that we're able to move the needle on these goals with digital marketing. And then we do a gap analysis. So that's what we're going to go through here in the next couple of slides. So when we look at what is most important, last year when we looked at this, it was a really clear delineated breakout, right? All of the patient and consumer goals were at the top. All of the financial goals were right in the middle. All of the goals related to other audiences were at the bottom. And we have a pretty similar pattern this year. There's a little bit of overlap or a crossover between a couple of these, but that's still largely the pattern that we're seeing. Just for context, last year our top scoring item was consumer experience, and it got a 1.22. So the numbers haven't moved for most items all that much within this from a scoring perspective, with one exception, and that is patient acquisition. So patient acquisition has leapt to the top of the list with the highest score we've ever seen for one of these goal items, right? 1.38. It's jumped to the top and by a pretty wide margin just when you look at the grouping of things here. Again, this makes sense. In particular, data collection was in June and July. This is as a lot of organizations were opening up, trying to fill schedules. But even past that kind of immediate moment, I think filling schedules, getting patients in for services, trying to make up for some of the financial ground that was lost during the first half of the year, I think is going to be a huge priority for organizations for a while. So patient acquisition, the number one item on the list. Everything else here may be shuffled a little bit up or down, but pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. When we look at leaders, many of the goals here, leaders found to be more important. But the order of things is pretty similar. The actual story, I think, that's kind of interesting is within the average group. So the average group, just the ordering of items here is a little bit different. Patient acquisition is still number one, and actually the highest score that we got from any of the groups for patient acquisition, but that was followed then by revenue, profitability, and return on investment. I guess ROI, revenue, and profitability. I guess I grabbed patient satisfaction in my little box. It shouldn't be there. But those financial metrics were really 2, 3, 4 in terms of the priority list for those average organizations. And so here we've got this interesting situation. It could be for some of these organizations, they don't have as much trust and authority in the organization, so they're having to justify. Could also be that groups within this area are just feeling the financial pinch a bit more. Whatever the answer is, the groups in this average category are much, much more likely to have to be justifying every dollar they're investing with financial metrics. These are much, much more important for this group. So let's look at the other side of that coin. Again, where are we able to demonstrate that digital marketing has improved our performance against each one of these goals? Overall, we're pretty good at demonstrating consumer awareness, consumer engagement, new patient recruitment, and ROI. And we'll come back to ROI. That's an interesting one. It moved a lot this year. Leaders are particularly good, and again, relative to everybody else, in demonstrating new patient recruitment, community relations, and population health. Population health is one where it's mostly a priority for those leaders, and they are doing a much better job of measuring that as well. Again, the real story I kind of hinted at a moment ago is ROI. Last year, ROI, the score here for demonstration, or the ability to demonstrate, was 0.35. It is more than doubled from 0.35 to 0.73 this year. That's a huge leap. A huge leap. And so they've really, there's been a lot of indication that people have been able to close the gap between the importance of this one and the ability to measure. So we look at our gap analysis. And so that top line is the importance. The bottom line is that ability to demonstrate. And we've ordered this based on the size of the gap between those two scores. And as I mentioned, ROI falls right here in the middle. Last year, the financial metrics, profitability, revenue, ROI, were on the left side of that chart. And profitability and revenue are still over there. I do have a little bit of a question within this, because it does seem like it's really hard to be delivering on ROI if you're still having trouble demonstrating the profitability and revenue that you're delivering. But again, it's all self-reported, and so we're going to take for granted that organizations have figured out how to deliver it in a way for their organization that is meaningful. Beyond that, we still see that the patient satisfaction, consumer experience, a lot of those patient-related goals, because of the very high importance of many of those, continue to have a pretty high gap. Areas over on the right, consumer awareness, employee recruitment, fundraising, sometimes easier to measure, and so the gaps are much, much tighter around some of those items. We also ask within this, what features of the website are most important to your ongoing success? And so here, again, we've got the overall score, leader score, average, laggard. That's what our 4 bars are on the chart. The items at the top of the list, kind of interesting. Provider directory, online bill payment. These are core capabilities. This is pretty consistent with previous years, but it's good to know that some of those core capabilities continue to be, on the whole, considered to be some of the most important things for the website. That next set of items, though, is a little bit different, a little bit new. Not that things like appointment scheduling weren't important, but not as important as they're perceived to be right now. So appointment scheduling for new patients and current patients, video visits, those things are much more important than what we've seen in past years. And again, that fits with that goal of getting schedules filled, getting people in. And of course, video visits was something that was a pretty minor piece of the overall puzzle, small slice of the business in the past. At this moment, still a much bigger piece, continues to be a bigger piece than it has been, although certainly a much smaller piece of the pie than it was earlier this year. When we look at where leaders have the biggest gap here, where they're most they express the most difference of opinion. Appointment scheduling for new patients, incredibly important to them. Their number one item, and we're a place where they far outpace the other cohorts. Physician ratings and reviews, CRM integration, and personalization, where again, it's kind of middle of the pack in terms of their scoring, but much more importance placed on that relative to the other cohort groups there. Those are really the folks who are focusing most of the time and energy on personalization. Now, for that question, we didn't actually have people score on a 1 to 5 scale. We had sort of terms for each of those different numbers. The highest scoring item was competitive differentiator. So if you said it was competitive differentiation, that was the top score within that previous question. So we wanted to take a step back and say, hey, if we just looked at what organizations feel are their competitive differentiators, how does this list play out? And so, certainly things like the provider directory are still relatively high on this list, but those couple of items on getting patients and physicians connected, appointment scheduling for new and current patients, video visits, as well as, maybe even patient satisfaction and ratings and reviews, those are far and away the things that the largest number of respondents indicated were competitive differentiators for their organizations. Huge capacity there. I did want to point out a couple of items, though. Mobile apps, AI chatbots, and live online chat. These were items that were mostly towards the bottom, although mobile apps did make their way up the list a couple of spots this year. When we look at the overall score, though, those three scored very, very poorly. We find them kind of middle of the pack here when we look at the data this way. Bottom line here, these items have some real fans, some people who feel like these are competitive differentiating capabilities for their organization. And then everyone else pretty much doesn't give them much credence at this point. So it's a love it or leave it kind of world for these items. Still, again, not at the top of the list because it's not something that's being embraced that way by a really large number of organizations, but they have their fans, and those organizations and those individuals are putting them to good use on their web properties today. So a couple of other pandemic-related questions. We really wanted to see if the pandemic has slowed things down or sped things up. And anecdotally, we were hearing a very mixed bag from the organizations that we work with. Certainly organizations that had put the brakes on a lot of things that they were doing this year from a digital marketing and digital transformation perspective. And this chart's digital marketing, and we'll follow with digital transformation in just a sec. But we also heard some organizations that were saying, you know what, this has really lit a fire under our organization. We've demonstrated the power of marketing. We've demonstrated the power of digital. We've demonstrated the importance of communication. Telehealth has become a big deal, so on and so forth. For some organizations, this actually got them moving faster than they had been before. And what we saw when we actually asked the question is a similar kind of mixed bag. On the digital marketing side of things, we had a somewhat larger group, 41%, that said, you know what, we have initiatives that have been canceled. We have initiatives that have been delayed. This is definitely slowing us down. And, it can be for any number of reasons: uncertainty, resources, ability to focus attention, staff loss, whatever. 31% saying, you know what, we're going faster. Interestingly, we had the other category, and almost all of those answers were, we've had some of both. Right, really more of a, we've reprioritized. Some things are moving faster, some things have been delayed. It's a mixed bag within our organization. So that's what that 8.5% in the upper left corner is. Now, when we look at digital transformation initiatives, we get a similar story, although the two sides are a little more balanced, and we have a lot more organizations that are unsure of what's going to happen in this space. So a little more than a third saying, digital transformation, we're putting on the brakes. About a third that say digital transformation, we are moving faster, and then a greater deal of uncertainty of organizations saying, you know what, we just don't know yet. It's too much uncertainty to tell which direction we're going here. Now we have goals, we have some of these other things. I think it's important then to say, okay, what is getting in the way? What is slowing us down? And this is a question that we refactored quite a bit from last year. So it's hard to draw a lot of parallels to what we've gotten as answers in the past. But interesting results nonetheless. So lack of internal buy-in was the top item by a small margin. And really, when you look at the overall, that tan line here, or I guess darker gray line here, I apologize, it's not the most accessible colors that we've got going here. But the first couple of items here are really fairly close together when you look at the whole group. When we look at the leader-laggard cohorts, there's a little bit more differentiation there. Lack of internal buy-in, though, top of that list. When we look at where leaders are feeling the most constraint or the biggest barriers, it's in the inability to measure ROI and the inability to support online transactions with offline operations. This is interesting. Again, it's hard to draw all the conclusions from last year, but this has been interesting in part because, first off, leaders last year were the only group that was really feeling the pain of the ability to support online transactions with offline operations, right? The online-offline split and the ability to work with operations to make things happen. They were the only group to feel that. This year, they're actually number 2 behind the average group in the constraints that they're feeling around that. So the average group is maybe where that leading group was 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe leaders starting to find better tools and better ways to navigate that, or they've made progress in those relationships and those working relationships. In addition to that, I think just across the board, it was interesting to see that leaders in a lot of ways were just feeling lower barriers overall than a lot of the other groups. And it's actually, in some cases, the laggards, in some cases, the average that are feeling the most pain around some of these items. So that's a little bit of a shift as well. Again, the leaders probably getting a little more adept at navigating some of these things within their organizations. Now, for the groups that indicated, that they're having some challenges measuring ROI from that earlier question, we asked a follow-up question, dug in a little bit, and really looked at, okay, what is getting in the way here? Why can't your organization demonstrate positive ROI? Lack of tools or infrastructure has been at the top of that list, continues to be at the top of that list. When organizations don't have the tools that they need, this is just a really hard problem to answer for a large number of projects, right? Not a surprise there. The big story in this one this year, as it was last year, is number 2, which is, hey, we are not measuring ROI because no one's asking us to measure ROI. It's not something we're being asked to actually report to the organization, and so we just don't go through the pain and the trouble to do it. Last year, about a third of organizations responded saying that was the case. This year, half of responding organizations said they're not measuring ROI because no one is asking. We do see indications across a number of areas of the survey that a lot more organizations are reporting on ROI. And interestingly here again, none of the leaders said that they're not doing it because of lack of expertise or because it's too time consuming. That was sort of a positive. However, when we look at the third from the bottom, we can measure ROI, but it's not positive. That's one that really has exploded this year. So we see more organizations able to deliver on the numbers around this, and maybe there's still work on the process. Maybe they're not capturing all the dollars that they would like to be able to capture, things like that. But last year we had less than 2% of organizations indicating that they were measuring ROI, but it wasn't positive. This year that's jumped to 14%, a huge shift there. So we are seeing more organizations measuring ROI. And of course, one of the reasons we measure ROI is to understand what things are actually working for us and what aren't. And this may be giving some evidence to help with that. All right, let's talk budgets. And we've looked at budgets. We made some shifts last year. We looked at budgets in a couple of different ways. One of the things that we got from our survey advisor group was this idea that the most useful way for them to understand budgets is to understand what portion of the overall marketing budget is going into digital. So I tend to look at this 50% line, like we can do the math, but just because of the way things work out, it lines up pretty closely here. In a nutshell, most organizations are running in that 21 to 40% of their overall marketing budget that's going into digital. If we look at where that line falls in terms of the distribution of things, for laggards, that's probably closer to the 21% end. For leaders, it's maybe 30% or so of budget on average. We only had a handful of organizations this year that indicated that they were spending more than 60% of their marketing budget on digital. I think it was less than 2% of total organizations. They all happen to be within the average cohort. So there are organizations that are in on this in a much bigger way, but they are few and far between. Although again, decent number of organizations spending 40 to 60% in that range. We then look at how respondents feel like their marketing budgets and digital marketing budgets are going to change in the coming year. So we start with the overall marketing budget, and I think the big thing to look at here is the number of organizations cutting their overall marketing budget is huge. More than 40% of respondents indicated that they were cutting their overall marketing budget. Leaders were least likely to be cutting their budget, also least likely to be increasing their marketing budget. Laggards actually are more likely to be increasing their budget, but they're pretty likely to be cutting as well. When we look out at digital, that number is 20%, 21, almost 22% of overall. And again, leaders least likely to be cutting their digital marketing budgets here. Let me put this number in context, though, because in all of the years that we've done this, we've never seen more than a handful of organizations telling us that they were going to cut their digital marketing budget from the current year to the next year. And when you dig into those specific situations, it's almost always that they have a major project underway, they've staffed up, they've gotten additional special one-year budgets to do things, and next year the budget is going to be radically different because that project will be done. That is clearly now what we're seeing here. We just have, over the years and years, 15 years, 10 surveys that we've done this, we have never seen 1 in 5 organizations telling us that they are cutting their digital marketing budget. Those budgets have always stayed the same or gone up, again, other than in some years literally 2 or 3 respondents to the survey. So this is a huge sea change, and I think is indicative of the financial pain that organizations are feeling right now. That said, we still have almost 40% of respondents telling us that their digital marketing budget is going to grow in the coming year, even though a much, much smaller number have their overall market budget growing. Oops. So let's cross these two questions and kind of see how they line up. So the columns here are our overall marketing budget and how that's changing. The rows are our digital marketing budget and how that's changing. So if the marketing budget is going up for the organization, the digital marketing budget is also going up for the organization in 100% of cases. Not a big surprise, but there's the numbers, and it's really tangible and easy to see that that is the case. When we look at the other end of the spectrum, only those organizations that are cutting their overall marketing budget are also cutting their digital marketing budget. So if the marketing budget is at least holding steady, digital marketing budgets are also holding steady. However, again, we have a huge number of organizations that are feeling marketing cuts. Half of those organizations, a little more than half of those organizations, are also making cuts to their digital marketing budgets in the process. So about 52% are feeling that pain. Important to see, though, we're still seeing that shift from traditional to digital, right? We're still seeing a number of organizations where the overall marketing budget is getting cut, digital marketing budget is going up. Overall marketing budget is being cut, digital marketing budget is holding steady, or so on. Overall marketing budget is remaining the same, digital marketing budget is increasing. So we are still seeing that shift from traditional to digital, but with upwards of 40% of responding organizations feeling a hit to their overall marketing budget, it's no surprise that we have this unprecedented number of digital marketing budgets that are also taking a hit. When we put numbers to things, the overall non-staff digital marketing budget this year was a little over $700,000. Not surprisingly, leaders tend to spend more than average, tend to spend more than laggards. The proportions, though, I think are kind of eye-opening. Leaders spending more than twice on average what that average cohort is spending, and almost 3 times what the laggard cohort is spending. So the difference in resources being applied at these different levels is very dramatic this year. Let's talk about teams and team structures and how digital marketing plays into the organizations that we surveyed. So we started by asking where digital marketing lives within the organization. And for half of organizations now, it is part of centralized marketing. We've certainly seen with more systemization going on that more organizations have centralized marketing rather than distributed marketing. That seems to have been a trend. And we've seen digital go in many cases from being sort of off over there into being part of that marketing team. So half of digital is now within centralized marketing organizations. We've got a handful in distributed marketing organizations and about a third that are part of standalone digital teams. So that's holding steady, maybe actually growing a little bit from what we've seen over the last couple of years, but it does seem like most of these entities are moving to centralized marketing, and digital is becoming a part of that part of the organization. Now, when we look at team sizes, these are really similar to what we had last year. For laggards, last year we had 9.25 FTEs. We have a little over 8 FTEs this year, so down just a smidge. The average group, we had 11 FTEs last year. That's bumped up just a smidge to about 13.5. Leaders, we had about 20. It's down to a little more than 19. And overall, we had 14, and this year it's 13 and change. So really similar. On the whole, a little bit smaller. I'm tending to maybe write that off more to just the natural variation in who's responded from year to year than anything else. But it could be indicative of some of the cuts that we've seen in some of these areas as well as a result of the pandemic. It's small enough that it's kind of hard to tell at this stage. Now we break that down by that same group of 21 functional areas, and we look at where staff is distributed. And this is all by FTE, full-time equivalent, right? So if one person splits their time between 2 functions, then that's half an FTE in each function. If 2 people are half-time working on one thing, that's 1 FTE, right? It's not people, it's the equivalent of a full-time resource. The largest areas of investment here are in things like general website management, content, social media, and video production. When we look at the areas where leaders are out investing everyone else by the largest margins, though, a lot of that is content. So content development by almost a complete FTE, digital strategy by just a little bit less than that. We have content marketing, digital advertising, project management within that as well. And I just want to draw your attention in particular here to how much staffing leaders put in content development, right? It's their number one area of staffing investment. It is, almost 2 FTEs, 1 3/4 FTE on average. And it's just, they're investing so heavily in this area. And so when we see leaders saying this is an area where they excel in to a great degree more than everyone else, it's because they have put the resources behind that. We also ask questions about how organizations expect their staffing to be changing. So they can say that it's increasing, that it's not going to change, that it's decreasing. We score that up here by saying, let's take the percent increasing minus the percent decreasing. So it's like sort of a net increase in staff here. Overall, we're seeing the largest expected growth in staffing in marketing automation, video production, CRM, digital advertising, website management, and digital strategy. Some of these make a lot of sense, right? We've seen a lot of adoption of CRM and marketing automation, a lot of planned adoption of those things. Maybe not surprising as new capabilities or things that organizations are planning to bring on in the coming year, that we'd see staff that would go along with that. Video and digital advertising are areas that we're seeing a lot of focus and attention on. Digital strategy is an area that also we're seeing leaders really excel in, but it's becoming a more and more important function for leading organizations to be good at. When we look at each of the different peer groups here, the priorities for staff increase are just wildly different. And again, I find that fascinating. So digital advertising for leaders, #1 item, a net increase of from 21% of responding organizations. Digital strategy, huge increase area. And again, this is an area where leading organizations already excel in digital strategy relative to everyone else. We're also seeing big growth commitments in mobile app development and SEO. And mobile app development, again, not something that leaders are feeling great about, but an area where they are feeling way, way better than everyone else is, an area where there's clearly already been a lot of investment. We're going to see a lot of continued investment in that space. Now, contrast that to our average cohort here. They are investing in CRM and marketing automation in a pretty big way, areas where, frankly, I think leaders maybe invested a couple of years ago now. Now, it's the average group's turn to step up to the plate on those. Intranets, as we said, we're seeing a lot of interest in that, particularly because of the attention drawn to internal communication tools by the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of investment from average as well as from leading organizations. Digital strategy is a priority for the average cohort, as well as is content marketing. They've done pretty well in content development, content marketing. They've been lagging behind. Again, contrast that to laggards. Laggards are looking at video production, good area, but they're just behind there. General website management, not an area that's getting as much focus from the other groups. Content development, an area where laggards are clearly behind. They're looking to make some headway there. And CRM, the laggard group is starting to adopt CRM in larger numbers as well. We also look at what things are being outsourced. And again, this is really tricky to try and get a picture of how many resources are being placed from different angles. For many of these areas, it's sort of equivalent. You can do things with staff, or you can do things outsourced, and you can trade those things off. We can't really ask how many FTEs have you outsourced, because it just seemed like when we've tested that, that has not been something that people feel like they can answer very well. However, we are able to say, how much of the effort being provided is being provided by vendors or consultants. So hosting, not surprisingly, mostly outsourced. Web development, digital advertising, huge area of outsourcing, as well as web design. Again, across the board. The things at the bottom of the list, social media, much more difficult to do those things if you don't have feet on the ground locally. Project management and intranets, which are in many cases run by IT departments and things like that. A little different structure to those things. We also asked about the change in non-staff investment. So this is sort of the budget side of things, the non-staff budget side of things. But we're just asking, where do you expect it to grow? Where do you expect it to shrink? And again, we got pretty different answers across the board. So at the top of the list here, we have expected growth in digital advertising, video production, web design, marketing automation as the top items. A lot of things looking to get some additional dollars, though, for organizations that are doing that. We look at where leaders are looking to increase that investment. Digital advertising, huge. 36% of organizations net increasing digital advertising spend in the coming year. Video production, very big. Business listing management and digital strategy, right? That digital strategy topic for leaders comes up again and again and again. They're increasing their capacity internally. They're also reaching out and spending more with vendor partners to do that work as well. If we look instead at the laggards, it's a different mix, right? CRM is the top item, right? They're looking to get into CRM, a lot of these organizations anyway. Video production, web design, and marketing automation. And oftentimes we see the marketing automation CRM going together, although the numbers here are still pretty different. And interestingly, at the bottom of this list, we've got analytics and project management. And so for those two, we're actually seeing a net decrease in non-staff investment overall, which, again, just not something that I think we've ever really seen before. Last item I want to touch on is personalization. A couple of years ago, we've been asking this question for a couple of years. One of the things we learned early on is marketing personalization means different things to different people. And so we wanted to look first at what areas organizations were applying marketing personalization. So email is getting pretty heavy use. And again, the sort of darker gray line there is the overall. Almost 45% of organizations doing personalization within email. Patient portals, pretty consistent across the board. Print mailings, pretty consistent across the board at 35 to 40% of organizations. And then online advertising and websites, we're seeing it, but almost only from leaders, right? Much, much higher adoption from leaders than from everyone else for those items. Website personalization, almost 45% of leaders are doing website personalization. Only 20% of respondents overall, though, are doing that. And there's still about 20% of organizations who responded to the survey that are not using personalization in any of their marketing. When we look at that website personalization side, we asked what mechanisms for personalization they're using. And so geography has grown and continues to grow quite a bit. So we've got, more than a third of organizations overall, about a third of organizations overall using geography to personalize the web experience. And then for the rest of them, leaders are far outpacing the other groups. But traffic source or campaigns, so someone clicking through an ad or something like that, getting a personalized experience when they land, connections to CRM systems, using user behavioral data, or using direct preferences expressed by users, kind of a like what's important to me or today I am those kinds of uses. Finally, and this is the last question we'll touch on today. Our organization can demonstrate that website personalization has improved the performance of digital marketing. And this has been a really tough question over the years. We moved 1 year from having a huge number of people that were negative when we asked this question. They were really unhappy, or they really disagreed with the idea that this was impacting the effectiveness of their digital marketing. Last year, we had a huge neutral group with some positive and some negative. This year, I think we're continuing to see progress, although we still have 38% of organizations responding saying that they disagree or strongly disagree that personalization is improving the performance of their digital marketing. And it continues to remind us that a lot of these things at the cutting edge are hard. It's not a check the box and it's going to radically improve or change the experience that consumers get. There's a learning curve, and it's going to take time to master these tools and make them really effective, because frankly, we can take tools that have been refined well in other industry spaces, but they don't get applied in healthcare in the same way. And I think this is a great example of a place where healthcare can take a lot of these things, but there's a learning curve that really comes to implementing them and making them our own, and getting the full value out of them. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be moving down that pathway. I've seen a number of questions that have gotten posted. Please, in the next couple of minutes here, continue to ask us those questions. We will follow up afterwards. We knew we were going to run all the way to the hour on this, but we will do some answers to those questions after the fact, and we'll let you all know about them. In addition to that, again, we are really close on the survey. Again, we had a little bit of a hurricane that came through Iowa, kind of messed up our schedule a little bit. We're really close on the report ebook, though. If you go to geonetric.com/wait-for-it, geonetric.com/wait-for-it, you will be able to get your name on the list, and you'll get that just as soon as it is ready. And finally, next month, we're going to talk intranets. Aaron will be on to talk about intranets from a number of perspectives, including the intranet data that we collected in our survey. That intranet data will also be in the survey ebook, so you can get that a number of different ways. And again, you can go to geonetric.com/webinars, as you can always go to geonetric.com/webinars in order to sign up for that. So thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you again next month.